Lakota chief's twin babies freezing to death. A mute widow nursed them and gained a husband. The first thing I noticed about her hands was the callus on the left thumb, thick as saddle leather from the needle. She held my son and did not look up at me, just held him against her chest and rocked once, twice, and he stopped making that sound. The sound he'd been making for 3 days. I had not slept in 3 days. I stood in her doorway in the dark and did not know what to do with that. I am Tatanka Sapa, Black Bull, chief of a band the whites have reduced to a name they cannot pronounce, and a piece of land they have decided we may keep until they want it. My father was chief before me, his father before him. I have fought men who came to take what was ours, and I have buried men who fought beside me, and I have done the thing a chief must do, which is to keep going past the point where any man would stop. I know what I am. But I did not know what to do in that doorway with my boy quiet for the first time in 3 days, and a mute white woman rocking him like she'd done it 1,000 times. Let me tell you about the winter that came. It came early. That is the plain way to say it, but the plain way does not carry what it was. By the time October was half gone, the sky had turned the color of old iron, and the wind came out of the north with teeth in it. My wife had been dead 8 months. She died in the spring, which is a cruel time to die when everything else is starting. She gave me the twins first, and then she gave me the bleeding that would not stop, and there was nothing I or anyone could do. Her name was Chaitin Wikapi. I will not say more about her here. Some things I carry alone. The twins were boys. I named them Ohitika and Kohana, brave and swift. They were small when they came. Too small, my grandmother said, but she said it soft, not as a death sentence, and she was right. They lived. They grew fat on the milk of 2 women in our band who had milk to spare. By summer they were strong enough that I stopped waking to check their breathing. Then my grandmother died. August in the heat. She was old and it was her time, and she knew it, and I held her hand. But she was the last of the women who had been keeping those boys alive in the way infants need. The others had their own children and their own work, and I was their chief, not their burden to bear. So I learned. I learned what I had to learn. How to clean a child, how to feed one, how to read the sounds they make the way you read sign on a trail. A baby has different cries for different things, and most men don't know this, have never had reason to know it. I know it now. Hunger sounds different from pain, which sounds different from the restless, unhappy cry that means nothing is wrong except the world isn't exactly right at the moment. That last one you can't fix. You just have to carry them and walk, and let them figure out that the world is still there and still tolerable. I had men who would have helped, good men. But they had their own families and there was work to be done, and I would not ask. A man in my position does not ask. He provides. He figures it out and he stands up straight and he provides. I figured it out all through September. By October I thought I had it. Then the cold came and the boys got sick. It started with Kohana, a wet sound in his chest, a cough that shook his whole small body. Within 2 days Ohitika had it too. I knew what this was. I had seen it take children. I made medicines from what I had: dried yarrow, a poultice of bear grease and pine pitch on their chests, steam from heated stones. I did not sleep. I kept the fire high. I held them one at a time through the nights, and they burned against my chest and cried in voices going thin as thread. On the 3rd night I admitted to myself they were going to die if something did not change. There is a thing a man does not want to say, that he has done everything he knows and it is not enough. I had never said it before. I said it to myself in the dark of that 3rd night, with both boys finally asleep on a pallet between me and the fire, their breathing shallow and fast, their small chests lifting and falling too quickly. I put my hand flat on Kohana's chest and felt the rattle in it, and I said the words in my own language, very quiet, to nobody. I have done everything I know. And then I asked myself, who knows more? I knew about the woman. Her name was what the trader had told me when I asked, months before, out of nothing more than the idle noting of an unusual person, Eleanor Voss, a widow. Her husband had died 2 winters back. A horse fell on him, and that was that. She had stayed. People in the nearest town thought she was strange. A woman living alone 12 miles from anybody, growing her kitchen garden and trapping her small furs and not coming in for supplies more than twice a year, and never saying a word to anybody. They thought she was simple. I had seen her once at the Traders, and I had watched her. She was not simple. She was watching everything in that room the way a hawk watches a field. She just didn't talk. She moved with the economy of a person who has learned that everything extra costs something. I had heard from a woman in my band that the widow had helped a family, white settlers, 3 miles east of her when their youngest came down with the chest sickness. Had stayed 4 days. The child had lived. I thought about that on the 3rd night. I did not want to go to her. I want to be clear about that. Not because she was white, though there was that. There is always that, the history between us that neither of us made but both of us carry. But because to go was to admit the thing I had just admitted to myself, and to admit it to someone else is harder. I had kept my people fed and warm, and I had kept my sons alive, and I had done it since spring with 1 less person than I needed, and I had not asked a single soul for help I could not repay immediately. But my sons were dying. I wrapped them together in the buffalo robe, both of them against my chest, and I rode. The horse knew the cold was serious. He moved steadily, no nonsense, ears forward. The plains at night in that cold are their own kind of silence, not the silence of nothing happening, but the silence of everything holding very still. The stars were hard and white, and too many of them. I rode and I talked to the boys, not because they could hear me over the wind and the robe, but because it seemed right. I told them, we are going to a woman who knows something I don't. This is not a weakness. Taking your sons to someone who knows more than you is not a weakness. I was telling them, but I was also telling myself. Her cabin sat in a hollow of cottonwoods on the near side of a frozen creek. There was a light in the single window, yellow and steady. When I stopped in front of the door and got down from my horse with both boys against me, she opened it before I knocked. She must have heard the horse. She stood in the lamplight and looked at me without alarm, no door yanked back, no reaching for a rifle, and I said the only thing I had. I said, they are sick. I do not know what else to do. She looked at the bundle against my chest, and she nodded once and she stepped back. That is how it started. The first hour I stood. I had put Ohitika in her arms. He was worse, the rattling in his chest deeper, and I stood by the wall and watched. She put him on the table near the lamp, and she looked in his ears, and she pressed her ear to his chest and listened. Her face while she listened told me things, not alarm, assessment. She was reading him the way you read sign, noting what was there, sorting what it meant. She went to her shelves. She had more medicines than I had seen in one place outside a trading post. Rows of them. Small clay pots, glass jars, bundles of dried things hanging from the rafters. She moved among them without hurry, not haphazard but deliberate, like a man who knows his tools and knows the order in which to reach for them. She made a thing in a small pot. I could smell it, sharp and green, something with eucalyptus and something else I didn't know, something that smelled faintly like the high country in late summer. She rigged a cloth tent over the pot and over the boy's face, and she let him breathe the steam. She did the same for Kohana. Then she made a different preparation, darker, and rubbed it on both their chests and wrapped them in dry flannel warmed by the fire. She did not explain herself to me. She did not look over her shoulder to see if I approved. She just worked. I have led men who needed to be told every step of a thing and men who needed to be told the aim and then left alone to get there. She was the second kind, except no one needed to tell her the aim. She already knew it. I sat down sometime after midnight. I don't remember deciding to. I was in the chair by the door, and then my head dropped once and I caught it, and then it dropped again. When I woke, pale gray light was coming through the window. The fire had been banked down to coals and rebuilt, which meant she had tended it at least once in the night. Both boys were on the pallet she'd made near the hearth, lying on their sides facing each other still. She was sitting between them with her back against the wall and her legs stretched out in front of her, and she was awake, and she was watching them breathe. She heard me move and she looked up. She held up 2 fingers and then she made a slow, steady motion with her hand. Steady, both of them, steady breathing. I put my face in my hands, just for a moment. A man does not do that in front of other people, but she was not other people in the way that phrase usually means. She had been awake all night with my sons, and I had slept in her chair, and that makes a kind of intimacy that has nothing to do with anything except survival, and the fact that neither of you died. I did not thank her right then. I don't think she would have wanted that. She stood up, her joints stiff from the floor, and she went to make something hot to drink, and I stayed where I was until she put a tin cup on the table near me, and then I drank it. It was bitter and I didn't ask what it was. She would not let me take them home. I understood this without being told. Another day, maybe 2. The fever had to break fully. The chest had to clear. I could see the sense in it. I was also not sure my legs would have carried all 3 of us to my horse in the cold anyway. So I stayed. That was something I had to make peace with. I'm not a man who stays in other people's places easily. I know how to be present with my own people, in my own territory, in the world I have shaped and been shaped by. Sitting in a white woman's cabin 12 miles from anyone was a different thing. Everything was in a different place than I would have put it. The smells were different. The sounds the structure made as the cold worked on it were different from what I knew. I was out of my element in a way I don't often allow myself to be. I watched her, not because I was suspicious of her, not after that night, not after watching her work, but because watching is what I do. It is how I understand a place, where a person's eye goes when they're thinking, what they reach for first when something needs doing, how they move when they believe no one is watching. She was up before the dawn light was full and outside before I had my boots on. I followed her out. I couldn't sit still, and she was at the woodpile. She lifted the axe and split a log with one clean stroke, and I stood and watched her do this because there was nothing I could do to stop her and she didn't need stopping. She moved the same way inside and out. Economy of motion, no hesitation, no wasted energy. When she saw me watching, she held the axe out, handle first, toward me. I split wood with her for an hour in the cold, and we did not speak a word, which suited me fine. There is a kind of work that 2 people can do together without talk that tells you more about a person than a day of talk would. She set a rhythm and I matched it, and after a while it was just the rhythm, the axe, the cold, the stack growing. I had brought dried meat and pemmican in my saddlebag. I put it on her table without making it an offer, just put it there. She took it without making it a thank you, just incorporated it into what she was making. That was the right way to do it, and I was glad she understood that. A gift that gets turned into a transaction is not a gift anymore. A gift that just becomes part of the day is still a gift. The second morning, Ohitika's fever broke. I was holding him when it happened. The sweat came suddenly, and his body relaxed in a way it hadn't in days, the tight, terrible arch of the sick infant gone, and he went soft and heavy, and his breathing deepened and slowed. I sat very still with him for a long time. I was aware of my own heartbeat in a way you usually aren't. She came and looked, and she touched his forehead, and then she looked at me and she nodded slowly, once. I felt something move in my chest. I don't have a word for it that I will say out loud. Kohana broke on the afternoon of that same day. I was outside, checking on my horse, when I heard her at the door. I turned and she was there with Kohana in her arms, and she was smiling, not a big smile, just the small private kind, and she held up one finger and made the same steady motion as before. I crossed the yard in about 4 steps. She had a way of communicating that I found I understood more quickly than I expected. She wrote sometimes on a small chalk slate she kept on the shelf, single words or very short phrases, but mostly she did not need to. The hands, the face, the angle of the head, the particular quality of her stillness versus her alertness. She was precise with it. She did not over-explain, which I respected. When she wanted to say something, she said it the quickest way she knew how, and when she didn't have anything to say, she was quiet, and there is almost nobody I have ever met who is good at being quiet. Truly good at it, not performing it. She was good at it the way some men are good at riding. It was just what she was. I asked her on that second day, with my son asleep on my chest and the afternoon sun coming flat and cold through the window, why she had stayed, after her husband died, why she had not gone back to wherever she'd come from. She didn't answer right away. She was mending something. There was always mending to do, her needle moving through cloth. Then she stopped and she looked at the window for a moment, the way people do when they're deciding whether to tell you the real thing. Then she looked at me and she touched the table between us with one finger. Here. That was all. Here. I understood that. I have been asked myself by men who came to our land and could not understand why we stayed when staying was hard, why we didn't go somewhere easier. I have never had a better answer than that. Here. This is here. I am here. I went home on the third day. I want to say that right. I went home. I did not want to go, which is the thing I did not know how to carry. I had things to return to. I had a band that depended on me, responsibilities, the 10,000 daily weights of being the man who holds things together. I put my sons on my horse in front of me and I rode, and I did not look back because I knew if I looked back I would see her standing in the doorway watching us go. And I did not need that image in me in the way. I could already feel it wanting to be. I did what I always do when I don't know what to do with something. I worked. The winter was hard that year and I was grateful for it. Hard winters make hard work, and hard work is the only honest cure for thinking too much about a thing you don't know what to do with. I hunted. I kept the fires going. I kept the stores of what we had distributed fairly, made sure the oldest and the youngest ate first. I made the decisions a chief makes. The small ones nobody thinks about that keep people fed and warm and feeling like there is someone at the front of the column who knows the trail. My sons recovered fully and then they thrived. They were fat-cheeked and loud and into everything, and watching them I thought sometimes about how close it had been. Children should not know how close it has been. I knew, and I carried that knowing quietly, the way you carry a debt you intend to repay and haven't yet figured out how. But I thought about her. Not constantly. I am not a man who is ruled by his thinking about someone, but she would come into my head at odd times, when I was making medicines and found I didn't have something and thought of her shelves. When the cold got bad and I thought about how she was alone out there in it. When I was doing something with the boys and something worked, some way of holding or settling them, and I thought, she would have known to do that from the start. She carries that kind of knowledge the way a good hunting ground carries water. It's just there, under everything. I went back in February. I told myself it was to check on her. That was true in the way that small true things cover larger ones. The winter had been brutal and she was alone, and it was a reasonable thing to do, the kind of thing a man of my position does for anyone in his territory who might need attention. I put pemmican and 2 of the rabbit furs my band had cured in a sack, and I rode out on a Thursday morning under a white sky, with the cold pressing down on everything like a weight. The creek was frozen over solid. Her path had been shoveled clear of the last snow and done properly, not just a trench kicked through it but a real job down to the dirt, wide enough to walk easily. The chickens were in their coop and alive. The woodpile was well stocked. She had been managing. She opened the door before I dismounted, same as before, and she looked at my hands to see what I had brought, and then she looked at my face. I held up the sack. She nodded and stepped back. I stayed for most of that day. We worked on her roof. There was a section on the west side that had been bowing under the weight of accumulated ice, and I could see from the yard that it wanted attention before the next big snow. She had been doing what she could from the inside, shoring up the beam with a length of timber, but she hadn't been able to get up there. I could see the marks on the outside wall where she had tried to set a ladder, and the ice had made it impossible. I cleared the ice from around the base of the ladder with an axe head. She held the ladder while I went up. The problem was worse than it looked from the ground. One of the main support members had cracked partway through, probably in the first hard freeze, and the weight of the ice had been working on it since. I had brought extra rope, and between that and 2 pieces of timber I found in her small barn, we splinted it good enough for the rest of the winter. And I told her in spring it needed to be replaced properly, with a man who knew carpentry, and she wrote on her slate, "I know that. Already arranged." She came down the ladder last, and she stood in the yard and looked up at it, and she nodded with a kind of satisfaction that had nothing in it of relief and everything in it of competence acknowledged. The look of someone who had been watching a problem and now had a solution, at least for now. I knew that look. I have had it on my own face more times than I can count, the look that says, "Good. What's next?" Riding home in the late afternoon, I thought, I will come back. I came back in March. The snow was starting to soften at the edges during the warmest part of the day, that first hint of what's coming. I brought dried berries my band had put up in the fall, and she made something with them, and with dried meat that I couldn't have named but ate a great deal of. We walked her fence line because she'd told me on the slate that she thought one section had gone over under a snowfall, and she hadn't been able to find it in the drifts. We found it 40 feet of it on the east side, posts pulled over and the wire tangled. We spent 2 hours getting it back up in the cold, working by feel more than sight as the afternoon light went. Our breath steamed. The wire was stiff and cut if you weren't careful. When we were done, we stood back and looked at it, and I thought, there is a satisfaction in a fence post set right that doesn't have anything to do with the fence. It's the rightness of the thing, the made thing standing where it's supposed to stand. I came back in April, when the ground was starting to soften. The mud was something that year, deep and black and hungry, the kind of mud that grabs a boot and won't give it back. I helped her with fence posts that had heaved up in the freeze-thaw. In May, we worked on the fence that had healed over in the spring mud on the south side. The work was harder than February's work, because the mud was harder to work in than the snow. But it was also warmer, and there were meadowlarks, and the cottonwoods were getting their first green. In June, I brought my sons. I want to tell you about that, about the first time I brought Ohitika and Kohana to her place. They were 8 months old by then. Big boys, both of them, sturdy in the way that children are when they've gotten past the fragile part. Kohana had one tooth coming in and thought this was an outrage that needed announcing regularly. He was loud and decided, a boy who had opinions about everything and didn't mind sharing them. Ohitika was different, quieter, watching. He would look at a new thing for a long time before he decided what he thought about it. I had seen that look in the water's reflection and thought, he'll be a careful one. Careful is not the same as hesitant. The careful ones are usually the most dangerous when they decide to move. She met us at the hitching post. She crouched down and looked at them at their own level, which was the right thing to do. You crouch for children and horses, because the world is too big from their angle, and a person who comes down to where you are is a person who sees you. Kohana reached out immediately and grabbed her braid. She wore her hair in a single braid, dark brown going gray at the temples, and she let him hold it while she looked at him with the same steady assessment I'd seen her give the room in the Traders that first time. Not judging, reading. Ohitika watched her for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at her again. Then he put his hand out, very deliberate, palm up. An offering or a request. With a child that age, it's the same thing. She gave him her finger, and he held it. I stood there watching that, and I thought about the night I'd stood in her doorway not knowing what to do. I thought about the shape of what had happened in the months since. The slow accretion of days, each one small and practical and nothing that looked like much from the inside of it, adding up to something I could now see when I stepped back. I knew what I wanted to do. I had known for a while. I was working up to saying it out loud, which has never come easy to me, and which I didn't want to rush, because some things said too early are said wrong. There is something a man is afraid of that he does not always admit, which is this, the asking. Not the rejection. I could live with rejection. I have been rejected and refused and dismissed and survived all of it. The asking itself, the becoming visible in that way, the stepping forward and saying I want this, when you have spent a long time being the one who handles things and provides things and keeps things standing. To want something for yourself that has nothing to do with duty or obligation or the good of anyone else is a foreign country. I had not been there since before my wife died, and going back was strange ground. I was also, I will say this plainly, not certain she was free to choose it. A widow is a widow, not waiting for whoever happens along. Elinor Voss had stayed in her hollow after her husband died because she chose to, and she ran that place alone because she chose to. And any woman who is that deliberate about her own choices would need to be approached with care. Not because she was fragile. She was not fragile in any way I had ever observed, but because the wrong approach would be an insult to what she was, and I didn't want to insult her. So I took my time. More months. Through the summer I came regularly. We fell into a pattern that had its own rhythm without anyone deciding it. I would come, there would be work, we would do the work, there would be food, we would eat. The boys came with me more often as the summer went on, and they learned to sit in the wagon's shade and play in the dirt and be pleased by the chickens. She learned their sounds the way I had. She could tell Kohana's feed me cry from his bored cry by the second visit, which is not easy even for people who have been around infants. I watched her with them. She was not soft with them. She did not coo or make the faces adults make at babies. She was matter-of-fact and present. She would look at them when they wanted to be looked at, and she would pick them up when they needed it and put them down when they didn't, and they seemed to understand this and were content with it. A child knows when a person is genuinely attending. Infants are not fooled by performance. Late in July she did something that I have thought about many times since. I had been working on her south pasture fence. There was a section of it that had been bothering me for 2 visits, posts not deep enough, would not survive the first hard freeze, and it was the kind of work that takes most of a day done properly. I was hot and dirty and the boys had been fussy, and she had been keeping them inside while I worked. When I came in near evening she had the boys settled in something on the fire, and she pointed at a basin of water near the door, a clean cloth beside it. I washed up. I sat down and she put food on the table and she sat down across from me and she looked at me with that look, the real one for a moment, and then she looked at the boys, and then she looked back at me. She put her hand flat on the table, palm up, an offering or a question or both. I looked at it for a moment, then I put mine over it. We ate with our hands like that for a bit, which is not a practical arrangement, and then she pulled hers back and we ate properly. But the message had been delivered and received, and we both knew it. I asked her on a July afternoon, the next time I came. The boys were asleep inside on the pallet, and the 2 of us were sitting on the step with the last of the sun on our faces, the air still and warm in the way that July evenings in that country can be, the kind of warmth that doesn't press on you but just holds you. I said I would like you to come live with me, be with me, I am asking you. That is exactly what I said. I don't dress things up. I had thought about it, and that was what I wanted to say, and so I said it. She looked at the cottonwoods across the creek for a moment. Then she looked at me. Not the quick look, the real one, where she was seeing what was there and not what she expected or what she wanted. She had that look a few times in all those months, and I had never quite gotten used to it because it meant she was seeing me, not my position or my history or what the world said about a Lakota chief. Just me. What was actually there. She reached over and she put her hand on mine. She held it there, her thumb on my knuckle. Then she nodded, yes. Not a big moment in its shape. No words because she didn't have them. Just her hand on mine and a nod, and the sun going down over the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the cottonwoods, a thrush going through its evening report. I have had men follow me into bad situations because they trusted me. I have had my people look to me through hard winters and dry summers, and the grinding business of holding on to what we have in a world that wants us to have nothing. I know what it is to be trusted. I know what it feels like when someone is counting on you because you have earned it. But this was a different thing. This was not because of what I could do or what position I held or what anyone needed me to be. This was a woman who had watched me for a year, who had seen me exhausted and uncertain and covered in mud, and standing over my sick children willing myself to stay upright, who had seen me on good days and bad ones, who had, I realized, been making up her mind for months the same way I had, quietly, looking at the same material from her own angle, arriving at the same place. This was her looking at me and saying, "Yes, that one, I choose that one." I did not know, until that moment, how long I'd been waiting to be seen that way. I'll tell you about the coming that fall when she first joined my band, because it matters. It matters to say it plainly and not skip over it. There were those who did not welcome her. Not everyone, and not the loudest voices in the band, but enough. A white woman, a stranger, silent in ways that can read as cold if you don't know her or as arrogance if you've had reasons to distrust the quiet of white people. My people have had reasons. I knew there would be this. I had known going in. I could not force welcome. I would not have tried. There is nothing more corrosive than forced welcome. It poisons a group from the inside, people performing something they don't feel, resentment building under the surface. What I could do was what I have always done. Be plain about what I expected from everyone, including her, and let time do the work a man cannot do himself. What I said to my band, not a speech, just plainly, was this: she is here because I asked her to be here, and because she chose it of her own will. She knows what she is entering. She is not here to change anything. She will pull her weight and she will learn and she will earn what she earns and no more. Give her the chance to do that. What I said to her, not in words but in how I set things up, was, you must earn this. I will not hold you apart and protect you like something fragile. That would insult you and it would insult them. Come in the way you came into your own homestead. Do what needs doing. Learn what you don't know. Be straight about it. She understood. The first month was its own kind of hard. There are things I would have spared her if I could have, and couldn't. The way some of the women spoke in the language they knew she didn't have, not cruelly but as if she weren't there, which is its own kind of dismissal. The way certain men would not address her directly, but would speak to me about what she had done or said, routing everything through me. The long pauses when she tried to communicate, and the gestures didn't read the way she intended. She did not complain to me about any of it. I knew because I was watching and because I have known my people for all my life. I saw when something landed wrong on her face. She never brought it to me and asked me to fix it. What she did was work. She sat with the women when they would let her and watched what they did with the medicines and the hides and the cooking. She brought her own knowledge, and she offered it the same way she'd offered it to me that first night, without fanfare, just here. This is what I know. Use it if you want. There is a woman in my band named Witchow, one who moves carefully, who is our best healer and whose authority I had been careful not to disturb. I had wondered about this most of all, whether Alina's presence would threaten that, whether Witchow would read her as a challenge. Witchow tested her the second week, gave her a problem, a child with a skin sickness, and watched what she did. Alina examined the child, examined the preparation Witchow had been using, and she wrote on her slate, "This is good." She held up a jar from her own stores, then a question mark. Then she made the sign for together. Witchow looked at the jar for a long time. Then she took it. I did not see what happened after that. What I saw, a week later, was the two of them at the fire together in the evening, Witchow talking and Alina listening, and making notes on the slate that she would turn and show back to Witchow, and Witchow nodding or shaking her head. Two women comparing what they knew. Two languages of medicine finding where they overlapped. That was the turn, not dramatic, just two women deciding to see what the other knew. By winter she had found her place in it. It is not a place I could have designed or arranged. She found it the way all people find their place in a group, by discovering what they do that others need and doing it without being asked. The medicines were the center of it, but there was also the mending, which she did with that left thumb callus and a speed and precision that the other women noticed. And there was something else, a thing I hadn't anticipated, which was the children. Children liked her. They liked her specifically because she didn't talk at them. A silent adult is interesting to a child. Most adults tell you things constantly, telling you what to look at and what to think about it. And here was a person who would sit with you and look at the same thing and just look at it. No commentary, no instruction, just two people looking. The children found this restful and fascinating in equal measure. They came to her the way cats go to the quietest person in the room. Kohana by midwinter had started calling her Ine, just decided. He was a decided boy, as I've said. He had looked at the situation and reached a conclusion that satisfied him and acted on it. I did not correct him. She looked at me when he did it, a sideways look that was partly a question, and I met it and I said, "If it is all right with you, it is all right with me." She put her hand on Kohana's head and looked at him, very serious, and then she looked back at me and nodded. Ohatika held out until spring. Then one morning he tugged her sleeve, and when she looked down at him he said it just once, very deliberate, "Ine." Then he looked at me to see what I thought. I didn't say anything. He turned back to whatever he'd been doing. That is all I am going to say about that. Some things are not mine to describe in detail. I want to tell you about one night, the second winter she was with us. It was February again. February seems to be when the important things in my life have happened. Or maybe it just feels that way because February is when you're tested, when the cold has been going long enough to find the weak places in everything. I had been out 2 days tracking a man who'd been stealing horses from 2 families in my band. Not a young man, not desperate in the way of someone with nothing, a man who knew better, who had made a choice. I had found him. The conversation had been short. The outcome was what it had to be. I came home harder than I left. That happens sometimes. The thing itself is not what hardens you. The decision is usually clear. A chief knows what a chief has to do, and he does it. What hardens you is the carrying of it afterward, the riding home with it in the saddlebag of yourself, knowing you'll put it somewhere quiet and it'll sit there indefinitely. She heard my horse. The door was open and the fire was built up, and there was a blanket warming near the hearth when I came in. She took my coat. She didn't look at my face first. She looked at my hands, the way you check a person for damage. And when she saw I was uninjured, she looked at my face. She read it and she nodded once, and she sat me down and she brought hot food without asking because she could see I needed to eat before I could do anything else. She sat across from me while I ate and she did not ask me anything. She did not watch me in a way that felt like waiting for me to speak. She was just in the room, present, doing small things, mending something, turning the food in the pot, banking the fire. Ordinary things that said, "This is still here. The life is still here. The ordinary is still here." I looked up at her once and she looked back at me, and there was nothing in her face except that she was here, that she would be here for however long this took, not performing patience, just patient. I ate, I got warm. I looked at my boys asleep in the corner on their pallet, long-legged now, almost too big for it but not ready to admit that yet. A year's worth of growth since I'd been in this terrible February, and ridden to a stranger's cabin with 2 sick infants in my arms. I said, "I am glad I came to your door." She reached across the table and she took my hand the way she had that July afternoon, her thumb on the back of my knuckles. She held it for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods we had planted close to the camp's windward side. She had suggested this, second summer, small trees dug from the creek bank and replanted, and I had thought it a modest thing, but now in the winter nights I was grateful for it. There is a thing people say about a man like me, a chief, a man who has held things together a long time. They say he is strong. They say he is steady. They do not ask what he needs, because it is assumed he does not need anything, because if he needed something he would have gotten it himself. I had believed this about myself for years. A man becomes what is required of him, and then he forgets there was ever anything else. Alina never looked at me like a man who needed nothing. She looked at me like a man who might need something and who had the right to need it and didn't have to earn that right, which sounds simple and is not. My sons grew up knowing a woman who showed them by example that you do not need a voice to make yourself understood. That competence is a language, and steadiness is a language, and showing up every day and doing what needs doing is a language. That staying, simply staying when it would have been easier to go, is a form of love that outlasts most others. Kohana, when he was maybe 4, asked me once why she didn't talk. We were outside, just the two of us, walking to the horse pasture in the morning. I told him, some people keep their words on the inside. He thought about that for a while, his small face working through it, the way he processed things, not Ohitika's quick assessment but a slower, more thorough consideration. Then he said, "That must make them heavy." I said, "Yes, sometimes it does." He went back to watching the horses, but I thought about it for a long time after, whether her silence was heavy for her. I never asked her because it was not mine to ask. A person's silence is their own, the way a person's grief is their own, and my job was not to explain it or relieve it, but to live alongside it without making it into something I needed from her. But I watched her, the way I had always watched her. In all the years after, and there were good years the plains were generous and the summers long and my people had what they needed, I watched her for whether her silence sat on her or in her. The distinction matters. A silence that sits on you is a thing that has been done to you and can't be undone. A silence that lives in you is a different nature. I came to believe, in time, that hers was the second kind. She seemed, on most days, to be at peace with something inside herself that I didn't fully understand and didn't need to. She had her own grief, her husband, things before her husband that I didn't know and she couldn't tell me and I didn't press. A person's history is not an explanation owed. I had my own history she didn't press. Chaitan Wikapi was always between us in the quiet way of the honored dead. Alina never asked me about her, and I never explained, and Chaitan Wikapi was not displaced. You do not displace the dead. You carry them alongside the living and you do not pretend otherwise. There was a summer, the boys were 6 or 7, running wild the way children that age do, when a white family came through the territory, settlers heading farther west, and they camped 3 miles from our band for 2 nights. The wife was ill. Alina went to them. She came back the second day and she told me on the slate, "She will recover." It was something simple, but it would have gotten bad. I told her, "Good." She nodded. Then she wrote, "They were afraid of me." At first. I said, "Were they?" She shook her head, not in denial, in that way she had of meaning it's complicated. She wrote, "They thought I had gone Lakota." I looked at that word, gone, as if a person can go somewhere by choosing to live differently. I said, "Has that been hard?" She thought about it. Then she wrote, "Not the way they mean it." I understood that. There are losses in any choice. The choice to stay in that hollow. The choice to come here. The choice to be what you are in the face of what other people expect you to be. Those are not losses that require rescue. They are the cost of the life you have chosen, and they sit differently in you than the things you did not choose. The valley came to know us, in time, the way valleys know things, slowly, through observation, through the accumulation of incidents. There had been a period early on when riders from the white settlements would come through and look at our camp with that measuring look, and then go back and report to whoever was doing the measuring. I had always known how to handle that. Let them look. The measure comes back right if you are what you say you are. My band was well fed and well led, and we were not a threat to anyone who was not a threat to us, and the woman I had taken into my house was white and known to the settlements as a woman of sense. And those two facts together produced a kind of complicated deterrence. A man who wants to cause trouble will find another place to cause it. There were still men who tested us. There were always men who test things. I handled them the way they needed to be handled, and I did not bring that work home more than I could help. The boys grew. Kohana loud and fast and decided, the way he'd always been, growing into a young man who had his own ideas and was not shy about them. He and I argued sometimes. He had opinions about the band's affairs that he was not old enough yet to act on but not young enough to stay quiet about. I did not discourage this. A man who has never argued with his father is a man who was never taken seriously by his father. What I made sure he understood was the difference between opinion and decision, and who was responsible for each. Ohitika was quieter. He watched everything, learned from everything, stored it. He had a gift for understanding what people wanted before they said it, which is an extraordinary gift in a leader and a sometimes inconvenient one in a son, because it means he knew when I was tired before I admitted it, and when I was worried before I said so. He never exploited this. He just knew and was present with what he knew, and let me pretend I didn't know he knew. That arrangement suited both of us. They knew Alina as their mother in the way that counts, in the practical, daily way that adds up to a life. She had been there for every hurt and sickness and ordinary crisis of childhood. She had taught them things I didn't know how to teach. The patience required for certain kinds of work, the reading of animals, the way you do a thing carefully the first time and quickly after that. She had been the one Ohitika came to when he was 7, and had done something he was ashamed of and didn't know how to tell me. I don't know what she told him, because she told him without words, and I was not in the room. But he came out of that conversation, and he came to me and he told me, and I dealt with it, and that was that. I want to tell you about a morning, the last one I'll tell you. It was late in the season, past my 60th year. The boys were men. The band had gone through the particular changing that happens when the world presses on a people for long enough, some of it loss, some of it adaptation, the way water finds new paths around stone. I had led through all of it, the easy years and the hard ones, and I was in the phase of a chief's life where the decisions you make are for people who will live past you, which is a different weight than the ones you make for people standing in front of you. Alina and I had been together more than 20 years. 20 years makes a different kind of partnership than any other span. You have seen everything, the best days and the worst ones. The fears a person carries that they would never have shown you in the first year. The small dailiness of living with someone through all weathers, the mornings they're tired and curt, the evenings they're at peace, the way a person laughs when nobody is watching, the way they sit with grief. That morning I came in from the horses and she was standing at the doorway looking out at the plains. The light was the early kind, flat and pink, everything still. She had her cup in her hand. She heard me and she looked over her shoulder and she smiled, the real smile, not performed, the one that just happened. That was it, that was the thing. 20 years in, and it still just happened. I stood there for a moment and I thought about the night I rode to her door with 2 sick babies and nothing left but the honesty of not knowing what else to do. I thought about what it had cost to do that and what it had returned. I thought about the man I had been before I did it, capable, respected, effective, profoundly alone in the way you are when you have arranged your life against needing anything. She turned back to the plains and I went and stood beside her. She put her arm through mine. We stood there for a while without any particular reason for standing there. It was enough. It was exactly enough. I have done a lot of things in my life that I am proud of. I have led men and fed my people and held ground that was worth holding and walked away from ground that was not. I have kept 2 boys alive through a fever that should have killed them and raised them into men I am not ashamed of. I have done the work of a chief in bad times as well as good times, and I have done it as straight as I know how. But the thing I am most proud of, and I say this plain to anyone who will listen, is that I went to her door. That I put down what I was carrying long enough to ask for what I needed. And that she answered,